You'd think 288 Zelda bosses and a measly top 17 countdown burned me out. Oh, how wrong you are. How so wrong of you. I'm honestly surprised, so I put up a voting poll on YouTube with quite a few choices, and everyone wanted to know my personal favorite and personal hated dungeons from the Zelda series. It's been so long since I've done Zelda. Zelda is such a wondrous series to no end, and I want to do more of it. If there's one thing we love from the Zelda franchise, is that we treat it like an art form. They're all excellent, critically acclaimed games, and everyone has their own journal logs about it, making it a different adventure for anyone. No opinion is ever right or wrong. Not ever. Zelda is a franchise to explore, not a competition. You can't rank Zelda as fact. It is all up to personal taste. So, the dungeons. There's no Zelda without dungeons. Like everyone out there, there are dungeons, whether it be the music, the flow, the atmosphere, the boss, the item, that just did it for you. On the other hand, understandably, there are those where your mind please, just end. I hate this dungeon. Get me out of here. So, just two rules to help out how this will go. First, I'll split this up into two lists, with my first one talking about my favorites, with my second one covering the banes of my existence, with this covering my favorite temples. Second, I'll be taking my most favorite and most despised temple from each Zelda game and pit them against each other, starting with my entries up to entries that mesh better with me for the category as it goes on. This will help even out the field on favoritism, and no game will get left out. Oh yeah, if you're wondering what the 18th entry is, it's the Master Quest mod. That game is so cuckoo with its dungeons, it deserves an entry. And that's it. Let's delve into my favorites. The Snake Dungeon from The Legend of Zelda. The Legend of Zelda is a fun game. Unlike the other Zelda games, it doesn't tell you where to generally go. It just cuts you loose and says, you're smart enough to find them. And that part of the satisfaction in the game comes from the high of solving the mystery and finding the dungeon. And then there's the dungeon itself. One dungeon that definitely came to mind was Dungeon 4. As soon as I got the rat my first time, I knew I was going to go check out the docks, which led me to Dungeon 4. Compared to the other dungeons, it was a nice step up in difficulty without anything being too easy or too hard, which was definitely welcome because I wasn't too good with the controls in this game. A standout feature of this dungeon is my favorite item, the stepladder. It was amusing to watch Link walk around patches of water to suddenly start walking straight over them like an insta-bridge. That is pretty cool. I also like the boss, Gleeok. It was the first time when a lot of strategy came into a boss, and I enjoyed him. Why at number 18? It's only because I had to, and I happen to enjoy the other 17 dungeons more. That's it. All of these are my favorite dungeons, and this one is no exception. It had charm, a nice difficulty climb, a good boss, and an excellent dungeon to kick off this countdown. The Thieves' Town from A Link to the Past. I never grew up with a Super Nintendo, so I've never had the nostalgia for this game that other Zelda players have of this game. Ever since I played through this game 10 years ago, I started to forget about everything with it. So I decided to reflect back on the dungeon I happen to remember most, the Thieves' Town. That's a lot to call for because this is an extremely short dungeon, probably the shortest in the game. It's also simply a mix and match of moving treads and basic dungeon navigating. So why is it on here? Because of three things. The first being that the shock of getting the boss key early and finding that the boss wasn't there was a little weird. Where is he? Next, after checking out the dungeon a bit, there's a maiden in the basement being held captive. So, natural heroic instincts must dictate that I must free her and take her outside, like she requests. But she says no when I get to the entrance. Oh really? Trying to hide something, eh, pretty girl? Why don't we shine some light on you and hello, boss battle! Blind is also my favorite boss fight from the game. Since I'm a Dynasty Warriors fan, I love fast, frantic action in my boss battles, so watching the fireballs, the weaving, and the action was really a nice touch. Overall, a really short dungeon, but a great way to pack on the quality over quantity package, and for that, it's my favorite dungeon. The Snowhead Temple from Majora's Mask. Now, don't be startled and let me explain, but Majora's Mask's dungeons are my least favorite dungeons out of the series by far, but not because of the dungeons themselves. No, the dungeons are fantastic, wonderfully put together, and the designs of them are arguably some of the best I've ever seen. It's this mechanic mixed in with them that's the problem. You see, when I played Zelda 2 and got a game over, I had to head back to the starting line and hike back to where I had the game over. Plus, my experience and progress was wiped, so I was mad. With Majora's Mask in the dungeons, it felt like I was being slapped with the same thing, having to hike back to dungeons and losing my progress if I couldn't figure them out in time. So, number 16, but back to positives. I love the Snowhead Temple because it reminds me of the Water Temple of Ocarina of Time. Some could argue that the floors and coordination where the platform should go is frustrating as you knock it down, especially when it comes to trial and error, but I love the logic it encourages behind it to think things through. I love the Goron suit, definitely my favorite. I adore the snow and cave-like atmosphere. The music is really good, and Goat has my full points for being an awesome boss. If I didn't have to redo this dungeon about 4 or 5 times due to the time limit, I would have put it up much higher. But giving me anxiety and frustration is not a good call for a game mechanic at all. The Island Palace from Adventures of Link. Now, I think difficult games are completely subjective. There are some gamers who like things easier, and there are some who like things harder. For me, there's this high of intense challenge and satisfaction I get playing really hard games. So I wanted Zelda 2 to try beating me senseless with everything it had. Come at me and my hardcore gaming skills game. You want to fight? Come and get me! Come and get me with everything you have! Because I played other hard games, I actually found Zelda 2 to be too easy at first. The first 2 dungeons were disappointingly easy. Death Mountain was disappointingly easy. What I was looking for is signs to see if the game would pick it up or at least add enough creativity or difficulty to keep things fresh and entertaining. Thus, Island Palace. Island Palace was, admittedly, quite tough. Exactly what I wanted to see in the momentum going with the difficulty. Holy crap, there are lava pits, there are guys chucking knives at me, and the dungeon strategy started coming in when digging into these blocks to get to these keys. What? There are logic puzzles in Zelda 2 where you have to think things out? The boss was really upfront and personal. I liked the color red, and overall really cool. I honestly feel like I can put any of the palaces in this game because they are innovated or change things up a bit every time. But because my expectations were starting to fill up to the brim with this palace, definitely a memorable place for me. The Desert Temple from Four Swords Adventures. Now, I consider Four Swords Adventures to be a really memorable game, but not in the game itself. Much like other linear multiplayer beat-em-ups, the good times come through playing with your friends, which is what makes it a great game, but take away your friends and play by yourself, this game becomes the most unmemorable game in the series by far. So when it comes to picking a temple, what can I pick if I don't remember anything? And so after a bit of browsing, I remembered the Desert Temple, but I have to admit it's only because of 3 rooms. But man, are they memorable rooms! The first one is this room, where these circling statues are really keeping a keen eye out for the 4 links, and it really brings out some interesting moments in trying to get across the room without getting zapped by one of these things, and trust me, I got zapped a lot. The second one, and this happens in Four Swords Adventures a lot, is when enemies start popping out of nowhere to ambush you. But this one stood out to me because it reminds me of a Link to the Past boss, plus it just looks so silly. Lastly, Shadow Link. He actually puts up one heck of a fight in this dungeon, and the chaos of the portals and the middle enemy there just screams pandemonium. And that's it. Definitely a highlight, but to be honest, this game is for the moment and for the friends, not something to reflect back on, unlike other Zelda games game-wise. The Ice Temple from Phantom Hourglass. Phantom Hourglass is definitely underwhelming on its dungeons compared to other Zelda games, but I think that's something that benefits rather than hinders. Having it being the first Zelda game on the DS, I was very glad that it slowed down its pace a bit so that I could get used to it. Not bad dungeons, and I love the Goron Temple and the Ice Temple. First, the dead obvious. I love the grapple hook. Not just in that it acts like a hook shot and trapeze wire generator, but also that it mixes in little original ideas here and there, such as actually ricocheting arrows off of it, or using it like a catapult to springboard yourself over large gaps. Great way to keep up with Zelda creativity. Other reasons? Sure. Just like the Snowhead Temple and Ice Cavern from Ocarina of Time, I like snow and ice dungeons. I have a soft spot for them. I don't know why, but I always love sliding on ice in video games, both because it's challenging and it adds charm to the environment. Or maybe it's because of Super Mario Bros. Nostalgia, because that was a fun level to slide on. Finally, the boss, Gleeok. Easily the best boss in the game, pulling in a mixture of Twin Rova with the innovation of the temple. Overall, I'm glad that Phantom Hourglass decided to take it easy with the earlier temples, but chose to step it up to having temples like this to show that it isn't a slouch when the time is right in terms of difficulty and creativity. The Spirit Temple from Master Quest. Have you ever played Dark Souls? It's one of those games where you get so infuriated with so many moments in the game because it's so impossibly hard. But whenever you get something done or look back on it, you're king of the world. This is the way to live. So what does this have to do with Master Quest? When you play Master Quest with the first dungeon, you know, what you want is what you signed up for. You want the game to troll you. You want it to test you. You want it to surprise you. You want it to make you think outside of the box. And when it comes to the Spirit Temple, the last temple, I hated this dungeon. It was so hard. It led me to so many dead ends. It was so tedious. It just kept punching me against the wall to no end. And to that, looking back, it did as it promised since the start and amped it up to the max. And to that, it did good. It did really good. By the way, there's a right way to do this and a wrong way, with the wrong way being on my hated list by so far when it comes to the Master Quest. I love troll games, especially when it's backed up with challenge, which was what I wanted from Master Quest. After playing Ocarina of Time so many times, the new dungeon layouts definitely made it a fresh and invigorating journey. Spirit Temple, I love and hate you so much. Don't you smirk at me. The Fire Temple from Ocarina of Time. I played this game for more than one lifetime. I've probably beaten it around 10 times and I'm retired from it after playing it so much for others who wanted to see it through. As such, my opinions of the game changed because of being desensitized. At first, the Forest Temple was my favorite, and then the Spirit Temple sometime down the line, and right now the Fire Temple is my buddy. Now, you'd think it could be the Gorons or the Megaton Hammer that I like from this. Those are cool, but I appreciate this temple because of its calm, straightforward, and it has my favorite atmosphere. Some may argue with me that the other temples have things like challenging puzzles, but I've played the game 10 times. Don't you think those would be chores to me by now? The bottom line is that I played this game far too much for my own good, so I want something relaxing, and this temple relishes that concept. I love the shrine-like environment and music. I love the soothing flow of the lava. I love how fluid it is to travel through it. And hey, I love fire. It's my favorite element along with ice and water. In closing, yes, I know it's an easy and straightforward dungeon for many Zelda players' tastes, and would probably pick any other dungeon other than this one. And heck, why not? There's a lot of other temples in this game, so nothing wrong with that. But for me, after all these years, I'm tired and just want a nice, relaxing temple to go through. Face Shrine from Link's Awakening. Hands down, the Link's Awakening dungeon took me the longest time to figure out what to put on here, not because of the dungeon, but because of the music. It's not because it's bad, it's because it's flat out random, so it's hard to listen to. And hey, if it's a dungeon I'm picking, it better behave itself while I explore the dungeon. And yes, this is my favorite dungeon music from this game. Along with meeting the one crucial requirement, this dungeon also has a lot of other things going for it to stand it out as my favorite. I won't spoil it for you, but before you enter this dungeon, you find out some information that makes the adventure depressing. So when I went into the dungeon and listened to this music, it felt fitting to those feelings I was having at the time. Next, this dungeon is long. It has switches to get you thinking, and there's a couple of points where it'll baffle you on what's in front of you. It adds a nice flavor and mystery to the dungeon, along with this interesting and fascinating color palette it has that makes it stand out in its own right from the other dungeons by a long shot for me. Despite all the praise I gave to this dungeon and it being number 10 with a lot of positives, there are a few negatives that bother me. The night pieces are a little weird and done by random to stand up. The bosses aren't very inspired to me. The dungeons feel like it drags a little bit, and those witch ropes can go right back to the Lanayru mining facility from Skyward Sword. Now, I have never had a dungeon go from my most hated to my most favorite when it came to this dungeon. I hated the Lanayru mines music. I hated that beetle that was making a return. The place isn't appealing and just screamed boring. Alright, well, let's straddle ourselves in and bear through with it. Whoa, that was unexpected. Just, what can I say? Wow, a time travel concept with a mining facility. Now that's original. All of my aforementioned complaints started to chuck themselves out one after another. The beetle got chucked out and replaced with the gust bellows. The sandy mechanical texture was suddenly a lot more appealing knowing there's a hidden world gimmick underneath it. The music, yes, it still sucks. Easily the worst in Skyward Sword in my opinion, but only because of these stupid notes. Sometimes I don't mind it because there's a lot of mining and technological noises going on in the background to cancel it out, but other times I need headphones for my own music to cancel it out. Thankfully, since the dungeon was large, expansive, had a fantastic concept that I had an incentive to explore and wanted to go on longer than it did. It is a true testament to how much I love the dungeon. Just get rid of that music. Holy crap! No offense to anyone who likes it, but the Swamp Palace from Link Between Worlds. I didn't mention this in my top 17 Zelda games, but Link Between Worlds is the only Zelda game that I can't stand playing. And unfortunately, I don't have the time to go through those many reasons. No offense, truly, if you like it, it just went against so many of my personal preferences that this game is torture for me to play personally. Hey, it's not like you don't have your own Zelda game you despise, right? So, the Swamp Palace. Thank you for this dungeon. With my stress bottling up, literally with the cap nearly blowing off, I needed something to save me from rage quitting this game. And this dungeon saved my controller from destruction. The Swamp Palace finally gave me a safe haven and finally got my stress back down with a second win to get through the game. Many miracles are happening. The game is slowing down to a normal Zelda pace instead of me playing a gauntlet game. The water is flat out beautiful. The wall hugging tool was used a little less. The water forced you to slow down and remember puzzles rather than breeze through them instantly. It was pure bliss as shelter for me to go to from now on. After every dungeon I played in Link Between Worlds, I came back here and simply walked through it when I needed to get a load off. Now I'm sure everyone is asking, why did I go through the game if it was biting my skin off? Because I'm a Zelda player. I need to experience the good, the bad, and the nasty. You can't say you explored the series until you finish them all, right? The Realm of Memories, the Hero Door version from the Four Swords. Just look at it! Which is going higher, your Nostalgia Blood or your Surprise Blood? What you're looking at is the Anniversary Edition, which is the Four Swords Edition containing more levels and material from the original. Is it against the rules? No. I said nothing about that. Besides, this level is awesome. Where to start? In my opinion, the best homage to the classic Zelda while keeping the level fresh with its more modern mechanics, and you're playing with 3 Zelda friends. What's not to love about that? It's mesmerizing to watch how everything works so fluidly. I'm going to say it, they should remake the original Legend of Zelda with something like this. Oh no, I've got plenty more stuff to run off with. The detail and quirky obstacles is really something to note because it means the developers sat down and thought this out. And not just that, but this level could take around 30 minutes. 30 whole minutes. 3 different sections. The downside, multiplier required. Talk about the title screen throwback. But I was satisfied watching the footage from We Right to Pray, which is what you're seeing now. Hey, I don't have the friends, equipment, and games to play this game again nowadays. And if you don't either, I'd recommend checking this gem out on their channel. Definitely worth it. Lord Jabu Jabu's Belly from Oracle of Ages. First, there's something I need to get off my chest. This is the hardest water temple in this series, at least in my opinion. Every other water temple stumped me for a while, but I got past them alright. But I think there are some moments where it flat out drags if you're not paying attention to every small detail. And not a big deal, excellent dungeon, but it's why it's number 6. It was done a little too well for my taste. So obviously I'll be bringing in the Zora's River to blast out that negative. First, I said back at the Fire Temple and Swamp Palace that I loved water. I adore water. But what blows this leagues ahead of the other water temples is the mermaid suit control, and easily my favorite item from the game. With this, it made navigating the dungeon really smooth when it came to flooding floors like the Ocarina of Time's water temple. What also resembles that dungeon is getting the longer switch hook. Do you remember in the water temple when it teased you that you needed a longer hook shot? Well, same principle. I remember getting it and saying, finally! Oracle of Ages is not for the faint of heart when it comes to puzzles. It's arguably one of the hardest Zelda games puzzle-wise, and this dungeon takes the cake by far. Listen, this is a good thing or a bad thing depending on your preferences. If you like the challenge of getting stumped with a puzzle for a while like me, you'll love it. Understandably, this dungeon could easily be one of the most hated dungeons out there because of how incredibly tedious it gets. I think I liked it because it reminded me of what I liked from the Water Temple of Ocarina of Time in terms of challenge, environment, and music by taking the concept to an insane level. I love the dungeon to death, but holy crap, this is arguably the hardest dungeon that I've ever gone through. The Earth Temple from Wind Waker. This may surprise a lot of people who have seen my top 17 Zelda games, but Wind Waker is a Zelda game where I love every dungeon like Twilight Princess and the 2 Oracle games. Some may ask, well, why? It's because the cartoonish graphics brings out the environmental vibe. They all have great music, and they're really relaxing to go through like my Fire Temple entry. The Earth Temple is the easy pick because of these reasons, and in my opinion, one of the most unique dungeons in the series because it exhibits so much Earth prowess. What I mean by that is that if there is ever a definition of taking the earth element and hammering it down into a dungeon, no temple now or will ever top this one. Yeah, right. Now, about Medley, your partner you travel with as you go through this dungeon. So I had to dig down deep to why Medley is just so flat out awesome. And I think it's because if there was ever a female Link equivalent, she would be it. It's not like Zelda, who happens to have the entire series named after her, is really doing anything about it along with Link in the series. Yes, I did just say that Medley is better than any way possible than Zelda. Why isn't she in more Zelda games? The Legend of Medley. Okay, this is just getting weird. Now finally, the light puzzles. It's pretty much the Spirit Temple version 2 from Ocarina of Time. It was still a simple temple, but like I said at the beginning, it's a nice long relaxing journey, and with Medley there, definitely one of my most favorite temples around. The Tower of Spirits series from Spirit Tracks. Is it wrong for me to put an entire series of this temple on here? No, because it gives me an excuse to put an entire series of dungeons on my hated list. Now after hearing that, you're thinking, oh, you mean those dungeons? Yeah, Phantom Hourglass and Spirit Tracks, though both DS games, couldn't be any more different in that flame war. So when I entered the Tower of Spirits the first time and found out it was going to be a series like Phantom Hourglass, I was like, oh, you better not. Oh, you better not. When I came back the second time and found out about the checkpoint system, I was like, yes, yes, yes! Ha 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 ha, yes! It was the deepest relief I have ever felt in my life. Whew, okay, I'm calming down. But that alone is enough to justify it to number 4 for those who understand that. Now, it's no surprise that Link and Zelda are children in this game, so it's understandable to see that Zelda is scared to go with Link to traverse this tower, even trying to convince Anjean to go when she clearly can't. Zelda is clearly a coward and despite being a princess is not willing to go easily. Every time you enter this tower in between each dungeon, you can see Zelda's confidence and abilities grow over time, which I have to admit is some touching character development to see an introverted princess change into somewhat of a hero like Link. It definitely makes for a unique chapter I admire from the Zelda series. Now, the tower. Let's touch on that. It's essentially a reskin of how the Temple of the Ocean King should have been. The music and increase in difficulty and puzzle solving gives a genuine attachment to the dungeon over time. You know there's something at the top. You know you're working towards something worthwhile, which is in my opinion makes this dungeon unique and fun in that fashion. It's fun, it gets tough, especially when you reach the dark sections. The other dungeons were good and enjoyable too. I like them all, but this one is a tad bit more special to me. The Lakebed Temple from Twilight Princess. If there's something I think Twilight Princess does best with its dungeons compared to other Zelda titles, is the focus on intricate detail. Twilight Princess doesn't put you in simple temple rooms, it adds things on the walls, there's a genuine mix of colors and textures around, and there's a dynamic that's coursing around in the environment. Let me give you an example, the water temple from Ocarina of Time. You can see it, the water temple has tiles, the wall looks the same everywhere, and Link is a lot more mobile in the water to get things going a bit. It's amazing to see the next generation of graphics taking hold of the Zelda universe. Now, let's focus on the temple. Is it because of water? Yes. Is it because of nostalgia? Yes. Is it because it's challenging like the other water temples? Yes. There are quite a few hidden and obscure paths around. The claw shot opens a few doors to move around and get you thinking on how to navigate their dungeon properly, so you'll be here for a while. Let's see, what haven't I covered? I think you get the picture that this is my favorite 3D Zelda dungeon, but it's how it mixes in all of these seamless features that make the game and this dungeon so immersive. It feels like you're there. The challenging dungeon is a sign that they thought this one out. And I loved every Twilight Princess dungeon. It was hard to just pick one, and it kills me to pick one, but this one poked out its head a little farther than the others, and for that, it's my third favorite dungeon of all time. The Sword and Shield Maze from Oracle of Seasons. First with this dungeon, the location. I know it doesn't count for my ranking, but I have to bring it up. All 7 dungeons so far in Oracle of Seasons have been in Holodrum, the normal world, and then to suddenly see the last one here in Subrogia is a very odd and exciting moment. Second, the music. Smack dab, they hit it right on. One thing you'll find out about this dungeon is the deep symbolism. That's why it's fittingly named the Sword and Shield Maze. On one floor is the sword-shaped floor layout, the offensive red and lava side where you have to be more assertive with movement, and the shield side representing the opposite. The defense, it's blue and full of ice with more puzzle solving and involved with the dungeon. The music constantly shifts back and forth. At first a gritty we mean business type of beat that reflects off of the sword and assertive side, then it suddenly changes into a high-pitched set of jingle noises to tune in with the shield and defensive side. Instantly when I walked into this dungeon, my favorite music from the soundtrack, hands down. Third, now to talk about how this dungeon plays out. At first it seems simple. You're walking into section bits of lava and ice that really test your skills like every last dungeon in the game should expect you to, until the last half of the dungeon where the two floors intersect with each other. How they execute this is absolute genius. Easily the most entertaining and best mechanic I've ever seen in a dungeon. Period. You see, the ice floor is above the lava floor. The problem is that the boss room and the other sections of the dungeon are blocked up by large sections of lava. And then you find these weird ice formations in this one room, and out of curiosity, I chucked one down in the lava section and... that was absolutely brilliant. Everything is top rank for me. The music, the challenge, the atmosphere, even the boss, Medusa, was an absolute joy to play. And easily one of the best dungeons I had the thrill of playing in a Zelda game. And to think we're only at number 2. The Temple of Droplets from the Minish cap. Now, unlike the Sword and Shield maze from number 2, it doesn't have as many prominent reasons in loving the dungeon, but this is more of a quality over quantity dungeon for me, which means less reasons, but a sacrifice for putting a lot more oomph into those reasons for making Temple of Droplets that much more special for me than the Sword and Shield maze. So, the first thing I noticed when I enter this dungeon that'll make it into my special 3 bundle, the music. Listen to it. Now this is where words are useless and it boils down to your own preferences to enjoy it or not. But this music conveys the atmosphere of the dungeon better than any other dungeon in the Zelda series for me. It's the perfect dungeon track. It's very dark and very threatening music. And then take a look around and it's a very dark and very threatening dungeon in itself. Then add in that you're a tiny Link in a claustrophobic block of ice and this dungeon is flat out creepy and memorable. So, how does the dungeon play out? Because you're on ice and water the whole time, the game slows down tremendously to coordinate with the slippery mechanics. Now that may sound like it detracts from the experience, but instead it enhances it by a great deal. When you have slow music and intimidating atmosphere that makes you cautious as you move forward, now pile that with the matching speed of the mechanics here, and the game slows down tremendously to appreciate every second of your time here. Now the puzzles, fantastic. I especially like the gimmick where you're slowly opening up the ceiling to the dungeon to let in light, both because it makes the dungeon longer and you don't know what to expect when the creature comes out, which stays in the back of your mind throughout the dungeon what that's about. Finally, the boss was fantastic. Definitely one of my favorites and an incredible closure to an incredible dungeon. When I left the dungeon, everything was perfect. It was the perfect dungeon and nothing is ever going to beat it. Well, with Zelda, you never know. Maybe the next Zelda will hold some surprises. It's a different Zelda game from what I've been hearing, so who knows? Alright, this covers up my 18 favorite Zelda dungeons. Now it's time to shift gears. Like every Zelda player, everyone has their love, and everyone has their hate. One cannot exist without the other. Next up, the top 18 hated Legend of Zelda dungeons. I'll see you there.